I'm really excited to be introducing my guest. She's no stranger to coaching conversations, and I'm sure no stranger to many of you. She's part of our core coaching team. You may have met her on peer-to-peer, or maybe the coaching skills, or maybe you've done some training with her if you've specialised in coaching and education. And that is the gorgeous Coaching Academy trainer and award-winning coach, Lisa Reed. So we're going to be discussing really sort of importance of this particular area, and really I'm hoping to that Lisa's going to share the deep knowledge that she has around using this tool and how you can best use it to coach others too. So let's dive straight into the conversation, and welcome Lisa to Coaching Conversations.
Oh, hi Sharon, thank you, and hello to everyone. I'm definitely seeing some familiar faces and names there, so absolutely lovely to see you.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I know you've got lots to share with us, and I really want to maximise the time that we're going to be spending together today. And I've got my learning journal with me, as I usually do each month. So I'm going to be taking some learning notes from you as well, Lisa. But before we dive in, I wonder if we could rewind, because I think I often say on Coaching Conversations, it's the stories that are really the sort of the interesting part, and for me, it's all about the journey. So, can you start just by sharing a little bit about your journey in becoming a coach, and a little bit around the area of the expertise that you particularly specialise in?
I can indeed, yeah. Okay, so I have been a coach now for 18 years. So I started my training with the Coaching Academy, of course, back in 2005. And prior to that, actually, I was a stay-at-home mum, and I was looking for something. I'd gone through a bit of postnatal depression. I'd come out of the other side of that. So I've got three children who are all in their 20s now, but were very, very small back then. And I was kind of thinking, right, what can I do for a career that actually I will really love, but something that can be flexible enough to work around my family, and something that I think I'll be good at. And so I was kind of searching around, putting the feelers out, looking more traditionally really at what I wanted to do, because obviously coaching was still very new back then. And then I came across coaching. I think I read a book about it, and I thought, oh, I would absolutely love to do something like that. And then my limiting thoughts all kicked in, and I thought I couldn't possibly do that. Nobody will ever pay me, nothing will ever work, etc., etc. And so I talked myself out of it for a little while, and then something in me kept going back to it. And eventually I found the Coaching Academy, and I thought, oh, I like this training provider. They've got external accreditations, they seem really positive, engaging, and I just felt really drawn to the Coaching Academy. And here I am, 18 years later, still saying how much I love the Coaching Academy. And along the way, I obviously qualified as a coach in 2006, set up a very small sole trader organisation, and then weirdly was actually working part-time as well as a teaching assistant at my kids' school, and then started bringing coaching into schools. And then one of the teachers said, oh, you should train to be a teacher. And so I did, thinking, okay, great, I'll bring coaching and teaching together. And what I found was that the teaching is, and I'm sure I'm talking to probably some qualified teachers or some practicing teachers in the room, but it's a tad overwhelming, folks. It kind of started to take over my life, and I found that the coaching side of me, I thought I would bring coaching into education, but what I was finding was education was eroding my coaching. And so I then made a difficult decision after a few years of that to shift back into coaching, to follow where my heart really lay. And I thought, I really want to bring coaching into schools. And the best way for me to do that is to really keep harping on about coaching as much as I can, wherever people are willing to listen. And it's worked. So I've been able to do lots and lots of coaching, particularly within education over the years. I have also worked a lot. I now have a larger organisation where I have associate coaches who work for me. And we provide coaching and training to what we call socially minded organisations. So we particularly work with schools and with universities and so on, but we also work with things like political parties, trade unions, and things like that as well. So charities, of course, as well. So that's what I do nowadays. Along the way, I also got fascinated by neuroscience. So I got some qualifications in neuroscience, and I run the Coaching Academy, the CPD session on that for neuroscience for coaching, which I think a couple of people were on from here today.
Lisa, it's just an incredible journey, and I know we know each other really well now, and we've worked together and started off as sort of colleagues and have become close friends. And I know your journey is so inspirational for so many people, and also your authenticity in sort of sharing how it's very easy, isn't it, for us to sort of share our journeys and all of the successes along the way. But what I really love is how authentic you are in saying that your work as a teacher, as much as I know how passionate you are about that, how it was eroding the potential of coaching. So yeah, and your organisation is just transformative for so many as well. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh.
And it's just always so fascinating, isn't it, when people sort of talk about coaching and isn't the market flooded with coaching? And it really isn't, because there's a coach for every person, and for every person there's a coach. And that's, I think, what you've demonstrated there around who knew that you could go and coach within political parties and different socially minded organisations. So it's lovely to open up the whole world of possibilities where coaching is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's dive into, sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say absolutely. And of course, I now have coaches who work for me because I've got more demand than I can meet. So absolutely, there's opportunities out there.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely. So let's dive into today's topic then. I know you've got a couple of things to screen to share, and I'll leave you to share those slides as and when you feel appropriate. But what I wanted to start with is just for those of us here today who have a sort of a basic understanding, or maybe even no understanding at all, and they've just heard the term, can you just share a really brief overview for those listening today on what actually is the Karpman Drama Triangle?
I can indeed, yeah. And what I'll do actually, Sharon, if that's okay, I'll put that slide up so that people can visually see as well. Oh, sorry, excuse me. I'm just going to have to, I've gone right to the end of my slide. So excuse me a moment, folks, while I take it off and put it back on. Best laid plans, hey, Sharon. I was all organised earlier, wasn't I?
That's all right. It's all part of being live.
Yeah, absolutely. And being willing to share a bit of vulnerability ties in quite nicely with with what we're talking about today. So yeah, so obviously Sharon has already signposted the fabulous article by the gorgeous Claire, who is here today. So great to have you here, Claire, and the article is brilliant. I was revisiting it the other day when looking at this. So I would definitely encourage you to look at that article. But just to say in brief that here is the model. And it was devised in the 1960s, around 1968, unsurprisingly by Karpman, who started to look at what was happening in interpersonal relationships and where there was conflict. And it's obviously known as the drama triangle. And I think as coaches, it's really key to say that we are looking at smaller dramas. We're not looking into the depths of people's life. We're not trying to delve and explore and go into their past and maybe they felt like victims in their childhood and things like that. That's not our realm as coaches. So we're very much looking at more everyday things. So here we have the model, and you can see that we've got persecutor, rescuer, and victim here. And I'm going to start with victim, and I'm going to illustrate this with a bit of a story actually. And this is a real life story based on me. And so I'm going to share with you how even in everyday life I can get caught up in this. Probably just the same as everybody else. So I was out the other day delivering some training to a socially minded organisation, and then I got back home and I was feeling a little bit tired. And when I got back in, the kitchen was quite a mess. Now, I'd left the kitchen tidy when I'd left that morning to go and deliver some training. And what had happened over the course of the day was my adult son had come downstairs, cooked himself a meal, and then not cleaned up after himself. So I immediately went into a little bit of victim mode, shall we say. I thought, oh, he does this all the time. This is so unfair. Why can't he just clean up after himself? Oh, and so on. And I was feeling a bit like that. And of course, my son in this example, who I love dearly and I'm very close to, and he'll be laughing that I'm telling this story. But of course, in that moment, he was the persecutor. So he was the person that had done the bad thing to me, as it were. And I'm deliberately keeping this light and everyday because, of course, as coaches, we need to focus on the everyday kind of stuff. We're not talking about serious crimes and things like that. So he was the persecutor. So I'm there kind of thumping around quite annoyingly, putting things in the dishwasher and wiping the kitchen sides and things like that. And then my daughter comes down and I say to her, oh, having to clean up the kitchen after your brother and so on. By the way, both my kids are in their 20s, as I've said, so they're not small children here. And she immediately went into, oh, gosh, yeah, he does that too often, doesn't he, Mum? And, oh, well, I never do that, do I? I'm always really clean and tidy. So she's there sort of in a bit of a rescuer mode, you know, helping to validate my position as a victim here. But then I turned around and said to her, yeah, but you do leave it in a mess sometimes. And immediately then I'd shifted into being the persecutor. And suddenly she's the victim because I'm then basically having a little bit of a dig at her for the fact that she doesn't clean up all the time as well. So that she's feeling like a victim. And in the meantime, then my son comes downstairs and I shift back into victim and I'm saying, hang on, why haven't you cleaned up yet again? And so on. But then he shifts into victim and he says, oh, Mum, you know, I work nights. I'd only just got up and I was really tired, etc., etc. So you can really see, hopefully, how we can shift around these models, and this can happen in everyday kind of conversations. So, of course, to keep it simple, our victim mode is where we feel a bit sorry for ourselves, where we feel like we've got a bit of a lack of agency, that things aren't fair. The persecutor is where perhaps we're wanting to tell the truth, to take some control, to show other people what we think of them and that kind of thing. And then the rescuer, which sounds so noble and wonderful, but what the rescuer is all about is wanting really to keep the victim in place so that they can rescue them. And very often the rescuer has a fix-it mentality and they have a sense of invulnerability. Well, I'm perfect as I am. I wouldn't behave in those ways. I wouldn't do those kinds. And so on. And an unwillingness to share to kind of own their stuff, the things that they do that are perhaps not helpful as well. So I hope that's helpful as a little bit of an overview. Clearly, it's not. This is not where we want to be in coaching, and it's not a helpful way to operate conversations because they don't tend to lead to happy conclusions.
Lisa, that's fantastic. And I love that you've brought an everyday sort of scenario. I think we can all relate to that. There were lots of nodding going on, I think, where people could sort of relate to that. I have to say, I probably go in and out of those different sort of roles throughout the week quicker than you can drop a hat, I would say. In our interactions, in our personal lives. So that was absolutely brilliant, Lisa. Thank you. Why would you say that this is a useful tool for us to use in coaching? Because there are so many tools out there. Why the drama triangle?
Oh, so, okay, first thing to say, I think, is, yeah, you're right. There are loads of models out there, and this is one of them. And actually, my big preference is to just stick with coaching and to value the coaching process in and of itself. So I don't tend to whip out models left, right, and centre with my coachees. I tend to try and focus mainly on coaching, good coaching skills. But models are helpful really as awareness phrases. That's the primary purpose of any model. We want people to feel empowered and to raise awareness. So this kind of model can really help us with our own self-awareness as coaches, and it can also really help us to get our clients to understand themselves better and what parts they might be playing that are causing them bits of drama. And what I find, particularly when I work with the kind of organisations I work with, so I'm working mainly with employees who haven't potentially paid for coaching themselves, and who sometimes don't always feel like they have agency over the choices that they might want to make at work. So sometimes they come into coaching without having any awareness of this model. They can arrive into coaching, and they will often arrive into victim mode. And when someone arrives into victim mode, I find as a coach that sometimes I want to shift into rescuer mode. And of course, that's, I'm seeing some nods there. I'm glad that's resonating with people. But that's the bit I need to be aware of most as a coach, is that I can sometimes slip into rescuer mode. So it can be really helpful for people to be made aware of this, particularly where they work in teams, I think. But of course, a team could be also a family dynamic. I've given you an example there of how this operates within families as well.
Brilliant. And I'll ask you actually in a moment how you use the knowledge with actually your clients. But what resonated with me, in that particular conversation, that particular part of the conversation, was when you were saying about awareness. Now, we know in coaching that we are coming into, to raise awareness for our clients, to make, the choices to change that they decide or they deem is necessary. We're there to facilitate the awareness raising of what they could change. It's, that whole, what I call personal power stuff. But what I was particularly interested in, and I wonder if you could unpick it, because I think there's a huge learning opportunity for us here today as coaches, is something you mentioned about us being aware of it for ourselves. Can you expand a little bit more on how we as coaches can use it as an awareness tool for ourselves when we go into a coaching situation?
I can, yeah. I'll get the slide back up because there's a little bit else that I want to say. So let me just share there. Okay. So it's really helpful to be aware of this model and recognize the parts that we can play. So for example, I've already shared that as coaches, we can sometimes, and a lot of you will also disagree with me on this, but sometimes coaches can want to be rescuers. They can recognize they have a natural tendency to want to fix things for other people, to want to rescue them rather than empower them. And so we can have that, we can potentially be drawn to that role. But sometimes we might recognize the persecutor in us as well. Sometimes we might want to be pushing our coaching clients to do the things that we think are the best things for them. And we might have gone into our headspace and have thought this coaching client should be doing this thing instead of that thing. Or I'm the person that's going to make them feel not necessarily bad, but I want to kind of hold them to account, maybe perhaps a bit too harshly, and make them feel more like victims in that role. And of course, we might sometimes as coaches feel a bit victim as well. We might feel, particularly I noticed in my early days when I qualified as a coach and launched a website, and people weren't knocking on my door going, "Hey, finally, we've been waiting, Lisa. Thank goodness you're here now." They weren't doing that, and so I definitely went into a bit of victim mode, thinking, "Oh gosh, I did make a mistake. Nobody's hiring me. This hasn't worked yet." And of course, I'd not got myself out there enough. I hadn't done enough, and that was why people didn't know I existed. But we can recognise that as coaches, we can, of course, play all of these parts. And really, the ultimate starring point in this model is actually the victim. And what we find is often in our challenges, we find that the interactions happen between persecutor doing stuff to the victim, and then maybe rescuer doing stuff for the victim. But sometimes rescuer and persecutor don't actually interact at all with each other. But there seems to be an underlying desire in this model to be the victim, to be the one that's being hard done by. And so we need to be aware of that in ourselves, and also aware of that for our clients as well. So it's a really helpful, I'll just say, an awareness raiser, and something to be very mindful of and to challenge ourselves to step out of.
I love that because particularly, I mean, I can remember in my coach training journey, and I qualified a little bit after you, and I qualified in 2009, but I can remember in the journey wanting to, you know, sort of in my enthusiasm of wanting to share my newfound coaching knowledge, it was almost like I was doing it too, you know. It was coaching was something I was going to do to someone in order for them to be better, and aren't I fantastic? And it's disempowering, isn't it? You know, it's a bit like if we shift too far into the directive sort of approach, we're disempowering, we're creating dependency, and that's not where the magic lies. We know the magic lies in the empowerment of people and the awareness raising and giving them self agency to be able to know that they have the choice in order to make that change or not make the change, and it's their decision, isn't it? um Lisa, how do you use it then with your clients then? Because I mean, it's fascinating, and I think it's such an important takeaway for us to consider it for ourselves and where we are using it in our own lives, not just from a professional capacity as a coach. You know, are we rescuing, or are we, you know, sort of, you know, persecuting, doing it for, doing it to? Um, but what about using it within coaching? How do you use it with your clients?
Okay, yeah. So the first thing I'm going to tell you is what I don't do, and then I'm also going to share with you another model that is the alternative model that again Claire has referenced in her blog. So the first thing, what I wouldn't do is suddenly whip this model out on a slide or something in the middle of a coaching conversation, unannounced, unexpected, because I suspected my coachee was perhaps presenting as a bit of a victim or a bit of a rescuer or a persecutor. I think that could cause a lot of, could be quite jarring. I think I personally wouldn't want that to be done to me. And I think this is the kind of model that really does need a bit of preemptive work first. So where I tend to use it is in my contracting. I also do, as part of some of the packages I offer to my clients, we have training combined with coaching. So in their training, I basically train people up about what coaching is, what to expect from their coaching sessions, and how to make the most of them. And I always include it in that training element. If I'm not training and I've got a coaching package, a pure coaching package, as we will all know, most of you, 99% of you are either qualified or training to be coaches. You will know that the contracting and setting up coaching effectively is the most important thing. So at that point, this is a really helpful model, or can be. Of course, there's other things that we can do instead, but it can be a really helpful model, particularly if you're working with people in teams, to share with them at that stage. And I would talk it through and maybe get them to explore how they might see themselves. I might illustrate it as I did today with a simple example. What we also need to be clear of course, is that we are, although this is rooted in therapy, and some of you may be qualified therapists as well as coaches, in which case you will know what hat you're wearing and when. But as pure qualified coaches, of course, we are staying out of the realm of therapy. So it's really important that we're not delving into people's pasts and saying to them, you know, so that thing that you've just told me that happened 10 years ago, where were you on this model? I personally would never use it in that way. But I would talk very much more everyday, typical conversations. And I would just, and then when you've done that and it's in part of your contracting, then we can revisit it in a coaching conversation. And we can say to them, oh, remember that model that we looked at? How might this model be helpful for you here? How might this be getting you to think? Where do you think you might be on it? And that leads me nicely into, if I can share my slide again, Sharon, to the alternative model, which is a much more of a coaching approach. So I'll share it here. And this is the empowerment triangle, which has been around for a good 20 plus years now. And you can see that there's some changes of words there. This is, I think, attributed to David Emerald. And all of a sudden in this model, our victim is no longer seen as a victim. They are seen as a powerful creator, seen as somebody who has agency, has the ability to make positive changes, and is resourceful and capable of doing so. And the persecutor is now a challenger. What that means is they might be bringing stuff that's challenging, and that is an opportunity to learn and grow. And you can really see that this is where we need to stay out of significant things. So we certainly, for example, I had a coachee the other day. She arrived into a coaching session and said that she'd not had a good month. And I asked her if she was okay. And she said, well, my house got broken into and my car keys were stolen and my purse was stolen and my car was then nicked. Now, it would be wholly inappropriate for me to go, right, where are you on the drama triangle right now? What she needed me to do was empathically listen to the fact that she literally was a victim of a crime there. And of course, that's not where we're not going into that as coaches and using these kind of models. So our challenge is, it's an everyday thing, isn't it? It's my son not clearing the kitchen one day when I've got back in from work at around 5:30, 6 o'clock, but he doesn't start work until 8 p.m. So for him, it was perfectly acceptable to leave it in a mess at that point. And of course, we get to stay in coach mode here as well. And what do we do as coaches? We listen actively, we're curious, we explore, we raise awareness, but we don't fix. We don't need to do that. So this model is what I also like to share, so helping people to sort of explain and see where the coach sits in these situations.
Really powerful, Lisa. And, there's just so much there to start pulling out. And it's, for me, interesting to just to reflect on how easy it is sometimes for us to get carried away with tools and models and wanting maybe to demonstrate how how great we are as a coach. But what we forget is sometimes that the tools are just and the models are just there to assist. The most important part of the coaching intervention is, as you said, being able to create a psychological safe space in order to use the best coaching skill of all, which is active listening. And when we actively listen and we reflect back, well, that's where the magic starts. And all of this stuff is just almost like, icing on the cake. But to use a metaphor of cake, of course, the icing isn't always necessary. Just when it's appropriate. So I love that you quantified that. And of course, it's important for us to remember what coaching is and isn't. And as you say, if we think it is a therapeutic tool, it can be used in coaching, but remembering what is and what isn't appropriate for us to be working with our clients on, and maybe when to signpost and refer as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah. And that's getting away from the rescuer mode allows for vulnerability to come in, to recognise that we don't have all the answers actually for our coaching client, and sometimes we can get lost in conversations and we can not know where the coaching needs to go, and maybe it's okay to own that, or maybe it's okay to recognise that this conversation has got to a level of depth or challenge that is beyond our skill set and signpost. And these are all good signs that we are not being rescuers, that we're staying true to coaching.
Yeah, I think it's also important to recognise that we need to be a really sort of competent in our coaching journey, sort of around when we're using tools like this. It's almost, I guess, and language is subjective. It's almost sort of advanced coaching models and techniques at this stage. Because sometimes just the very language can be disempowering, can't it? Using the word, sort of victim, persecutor, and rescuer, which is why I love the empowerment triangle so much. That to me is just so much more powerful. To think about the fact of, a client stepping into coach or stepping into, sort of creator, which is really empowering, isn't it? Anything else? They've got quite a few questions coming into the chat box, but I don't know if there was anything else that you wanted to particularly share at this stage before maybe I dive into some of the questions? There's just so many, but some of the questions in the chat box.
Oh, so I'll just share another slide I've got about thinking about ourselves, first of all, just so that I make sure I cover all of that. I think I've said most of it. So the first person we ever would work on with using any model like this is, of course, ourselves. And my three key things to get you all to think about, and that I need to think about, are, first of all, this model does raise our awareness. So giving yourself a bit of time, maybe after today, to think, when have I got involved in the drama triangle? And once you start to notice it, it's amazing how you recognise it. It can happen everywhere. So in the smallest of conversations, and they don't have to leave a really bitter taste in our mouth. Sometimes they're just really minor things, but where we recognise we've got caught up in it. And being really honest about that, so that we don't ever, if we're not willing to own our own stuff, then we're definitely at risk of going into that rescuer, lofty guru mode, which is not what coaching is about. And of course, reflecting on our coaching is a big thing as well. So just asking ourselves challenging questions. I really recommend people take time to reflect as much as they can before coaching, during coaching, after coaching. And of course, as everybody's doing today, committing to our professional development as well is really, really key to help us stay true to coaching and to really value what coaching brings. And then that keeps us in that empowerment triangle as well. And I've got some questions here that can be useful to think about. So here's your first one. What can I do to make sure I stay true to coaching? If you recognise that perhaps you're seeing a coaching client as not capable, resourceful and whole, maybe you're seeing them as perhaps in need of a bit more from you. Maybe they need a reminder. You think they need reminding to do that action that they told you they were going to take. Maybe you spend hours and hours writing a summary or creating lots of things for them so that you feel like you're giving more and more, and so on. So how can you stay true to coaching and empower your coachees? How willing are you to be vulnerable in coaching? That took me a long time. I wanted to be this, hey, I'm a qualified coach, I know everything, I'm really good at this. And I didn't, interestingly, in the early days, I didn't want to show vulnerability. Now I'm willing to. So isn't that interesting? That now I'm willing to say, I don't know where to take this. I feel like we've hit lots of dead ends and I'm not sure what we need to do next. Let's shake it up, let's do something different for a minute, and then let's revisit this challenge that you'll face. And but in my early days, I just felt, I wasn't as confident to do that. And how might I unwittingly be supporting the drama triangle instead of the empowerment triangle? So thinking about maybe little things we do. Maybe we go into persecutor mode a little bit and insist our coaching client does something that we think would be good for them. Maybe they say, oh, go on, I really need you to give me some advice. I know you're not meant to. And we think, yeah, they really need my advice. And so we go into lots of advice giving. And so on. These can be signs that we think we're doing a great job, but really what we're doing is teaching learned helplessness, as I like to call it. So that was a few things that I was just going to share there. I was also going to just quickly share, I obviously want to make sure that we allow time for people's questions, but a little bit about using this with our clients. So like I say, I would always share this within contracting first. So I tend to have a really good quality conversation. The first sort of session is always us just getting a feel for each other, getting to know how we're going to work together. I do a lot more talking in the first session where I explain things, I show models that I might use. I don't overwhelm people, but I might show some models. And if I'm working with teams, I do usually show the drama triangle and then the empowerment triangle to help them to see where coaching fits. And obviously through that, I would invite questions and we would create an agreement together. So that's how I like to do it. I think it's really key that we remember that the purpose of any model is about those two things. It's about awareness and empowerment. And if what we're sharing is not raising awareness, helping forward movement and empowering our clients to move forward, then we shouldn't be sharing them, quite simply. So if somebody did raise something from the past, then this would not be a model that I would raise at that point. I would be asking them, what do you need now? What do you want to focus on that's going to help you move forward. And I would probably just stay in coaching in that moment. And of course, really important that we do this with good rapport and a good tone, so that we're sharing that model before anything's been raised. So that if it did come up in coaching that they were talking about a relationship dynamic, say at work or within the family or friendship group or whatever, then we could say, oh, do you remember that model that we looked at? I wonder if this would be helpful as a way of exploring this today, and asking permission rather than, right, I've got a slide, I'm going to share this with you, I'm going to get you to look at this, you know. And of course we would never put our judgment in there. Sounds like you're being a bit of a victim or something like that. Could be really not what we're trying to achieve in coaching at all. And of course we immediately become a bit of a persecutor by doing that. And I would say, I think I've said this already, but it's really key that we know that this model is not always appropriate. And I personally think that where there's an actual crime that's taken place, or some antisocial behaviour, bullying at work or something like that, I think it's absolutely key that a model like this is not used because of that risk of us victim blaming. And we wouldn't mean it like that. We would just be wanting to explore, but we could in unwittingly, we talked about unwittingly, use the drama triangle, make somebody feel like we're saying to them, we don't care about you in this situation, we think you're being a bit pathetic. And I think that's really key, that we absolutely never do that, and make sure that we're listening and showing lots of empathy where people are facing very difficult challenges. Where there's absolutely no possibility of making a change, this is probably not going to be a helpful model. It'll just be a frustrating one. So if there's no agency for change, and of course if the situation's in the past, I really don't recommend that we use this model. And I personally wouldn't use it if somebody was talking about chronic health issues. I don't know what's going on for that person, and there can be a lot of challenges that come with chronic health. And I personally think that that empathic listening, active listening, and good quality questions will probably be enough in those cases. And again, there can be that danger of making people feel like they're making a fuss or something like that, what unwittingly so. Just by the nature of the titles and so on that come out in this. I'd also say I personally, I try to use things like victim mode, rescuer mode, persecutor mode, rather than victim persecutor and so on, because I think it just softens it a little bit, and I would say it's kinder, but it's also more accurate, because I've already shared that I have, in that little example with my kitchen, I was basically in victim mode, persecutor mode, and I'm sure at some point it shifted into rescuer mode as well. So hopefully that's helpful for everyone, but I'm sure there's still more questions, Sharon. So.
Well, you certainly addressed some of them in your sort of the things that you've been covering. For me, I think one of the biggest learnings from this tool is for us to reflect on how we use it for ourselves as a coach. So where are we sitting? So when we are reflecting, perhaps if we're doing a little bit of sort of self-reflection, and it's important to do that as a coach, as part of your professional development. What went well? What could I have done better? Maybe as part of that reflection, to use that drama triangle as a tool for your reflection. So where did I sit during this coaching session? Where was I at the beginning? Where was I when my client said X or brought up Y? Where was I when the client mentioned that maybe they didn't manage to action all of their agreed action steps from the previous session? So that will build your self-awareness. To me, that is just so powerful tool to use. If you don't use it for anything else, that will absolutely take you to what I would consider ninja level where a coach is concerned. Know yourself. Yeah, know yourself and your reactions to it. What I'd be quite interested in getting your perspective on, Lisa, and it's come up a couple of times in the chat box, and I know you've mentioned about contracting, but I'd like to sort of take us back to the empowerment triangle. I think it's I think it just, well, maybe I'm being directive here. It sort of sits with me much better, so I've been a bit directive here. But if we could just sort of could come up a couple of times in the chat box. So how might you use the empowerment triangle? So Lisa's popped in the chat box. How would you use the empowerment triangle in contracting instead of the drama triangle?
Now that's a great question. I tend to show both because I find it's that sort of shows the contrast, and it helps people to understand where coaching sits. So I don't tend to, I kind of show them the drama triangle, illustrate it with a simple example that's pretty inoffensive, like my kitchen story, and then I will share and this is where we sit with coaching, and position them as the creator, because that's the position that we want them to be in, that they are there to kind of create the future that they want for themselves, and recognize that as the creator they will face challenges along the way, and they might also be challenges for other people along the way as well. And sometimes they might sit in the space of coach as well, especially the leaders I work with, and I know Claire works a lot with leaders. So I have a lot of leaders that also want to use their coaching skills as well. So recognizing that our client could sit in all of those roles, but while they're in their coaching session with us, we are seeing them as the creator, us as the coach, and then there's challenges that come along the way. And I always say a challenge can be a problem. It could be a problem that you're wishing to solve, or a challenge could be an exciting thing that you're taking on. I took on the challenge of running a marathon once, but I didn't see it as a problem. I saw it as a big deal, and definitely a huge challenge, but it's a very different mindset, isn't it, as well, compared to seeing things as problems.
Fantastic. I think this really just sort of scratches the surface, doesn't it, in the fact that actually we can use these models in so many different ways, and we can specifically use them as sort of within our coaching toolkit, in coaching in sort of dynamics of teams, leadership, family, teaching, if you think about all the different scenarios that we might be in, and just sort of life coaching generally, in your interactions, where do you sit? And I can certainly resonate with the scenario that you gave right at the beginning with your son, and I can see how easy it is for myself to jump in and out of that, as well. But I think, I can't reiterate enough, and I know you'd agree with me, Lisa, that, we have to trust that the client is resourceful. So, it is about having tools in your toolbox to use, and models like this are fantastic. But remember, trust that your client is resourceful. We don't have to use them, but we can. And there's a great comment in the chat box from Nanita saying that she's recently qualified as an NLP practitioner. And can I use this technique in my coaching practice? Nobody sets rules around what you can and can't use. There's no, as long as you are working within, ethical guidelines, as long as you're working with your client with that unconditional positive regard. So we work with our client wherever they are within their life's journey, and without judgment. We can use all of these, and it's about contracting at the beginning. Lisa does very similar to what I do, and I know Claire does as well. In the contracting, we sort of talk through the fact that I might have some models or some tools or some personal development activities that may support you within our journey together. Is that something that you would like me to use in our time together? It's up to the client to say yes or no. And if they say yes, well, then we can then go back to that contracting and say, you've mentioned X. Remember at the beginning, you said that you'd be interested. Well, I have a tool that might be of interest here. Would it be helpful if I shared it with you? So we are verbally contracting with the client again at that stage. So it is important for us to, it's for the client to choose, not for us to do too. Otherwise, we're falling back into that triangle again, which is fantastic. Lisa, recommended reading, that's come up in our chat box quite a bit.
Oh, okay. So obviously one of the original books, which I must admit I haven't read, but is I forget the first name, but Burns Games People Play is. I've read a summary of it. That's kind of founder to this kind of work. There's a book, I would have to look for it. I can't remember the author's name, unfortunately, but there are, if you look on things like online bookshops, there's quite a number on there. There's not one I specifically recommend. I think there is one I read. I will try and find it, and if we can pop it in afterwards. I don't want to search through now in our last couple of minutes. Thank you. There's a recommendation coming up in the book, in the chat, I can see. So yeah, I think there is a lot of research out there, and I think you need to be discerning about what sits right with you. And some of it, if you've got a Kindle account, there's free books on Kindle Unlimited and things like that. So start reading, but always come back to you. Trust your own resourcefulness. How is this resonating with me? How do I link this to coaching? There is also a book by David Clutterbuck and what's his Peter, I've forgotten his, he often they write together. They've written a book about coaching tools, and they reference the drama triangle in their book. I think it's called Coaching and Mentoring Tools is their book. And
fantastic, thank you. Well, I know certainly in the blog, there's also some recommended reading as well on that. So please do have a look at the blog. There's lots of resources being posted into the chat box, but at the blog as well, we recommend some research and some reading as well. So if you're interested in that, then please do check that out. I'm sorry if we haven't had a chance to answer all of your questions. I think some of them have been inadvertently answered in the discussion that Lisa and I have had. But before we close, what I'd like everybody to do, which is really important, is for you to reflect on what one thing are you taking away from today's coaching conversation that is going to support your development as a coach. There's lots there, but think about something as a learning takeaway, something that you might action for your own development. And perhaps, Lisa, you might just have one thing that you might want to leave all of our listeners on today from yourself.
Oh, well, my one thing,
tip or inspirational message, Lisa?
Yeah, my one thing would be trust in your coaching. Absolutely trust in your coaching. But that is, I think sometimes we want models almost as a safety net for ourselves, don't we? And I know I particularly have felt like I've needed that in the past. So that would be my one thing to say. But yeah, and use models wisely, and learn the models, practice the models, play with models, get a feel for how that model will work for you and the coach that you are. There's not a one size fits all for many models. That certainly there's appropriate and inappropriate ways to use them, but you need to be the coach who you are. But then learn these things, know them, so that you can use them appropriately, but don't rely on them. Trust in your coaching.
Love that. Fantastic. Well, I'm going to take away a very similar learning point to Dawn Rudder, who's put in the chat box. I'm going to use it for my own self-awareness, and that's certainly my ongoing developmental learning point from today as well. Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, everyone who has joined us again on this month's coaching conversation. Always fascinating to hear from our different guests. As I say, remember next month we have Rachel Schofield, who's a BBC reporter and author. So please do join us for that. But from me, Saloni, Lisa, and the whole team at the Coaching Academy, thanks again for joining us. See you all next month, and have a fantastic rest of your month. Take care.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.